Southampton author Phil Keith has been out and about across Long Island promoting his new book, Blackhorse Riders, a true story about Vietnam veterans who finally received recognition for their valor in a battle and rescue operation they took part in over 40 years ago. Keith says the book is being well received.
Sales have been very good. I speak with my editor about once a week, and we're really doing quite well. And I guess one of the telling features is, how well you're doing in individual markets, and I guess they track 100 different markets around the country, and the book is now sold in 97 of them, so they're very pleased with that too.
Keith has been speaking and signing books at several local venues. We caught up with him at a book review in Huntington.
When you think about books and bookstores and being part of the scene here on Long Island, you think of Book Review. They've done a wonderful job over the years supporting authors in general, but Long Island authors in particular, and it's always very comforting to come here and take part in their presentations, and it's a good thing. They do a wonderful job, and very happy to be part of it.
A Vietnam veteran himself, Keith says he's pleased that the book is being applauded in military circles.
I would have anticipated and hoped that military people in particular would like the book, and so far that seems to be quite true. I've been invited to come up to West Point, which is a nice coup, to do a presentation there. I'm working with the Pritzker Library, Pritzker Military Museum in Chicago, so we might do something there. And a lot of the guys who were involved in the book are giving me notes and emails from around the country saying that, oh yeah, we see people buying the book, and it seems to be going quite well. But I've also been very pleased that a number of family members, and in a couple of instances even wives of some of these guys who were involved in the book, have come forward and said, my husband has never talked about his experiences in Vietnam, and all of a sudden I'm able to read this book and find out what he was involved with and what he did, and it's really made a difference, and that makes me feel very good too.
And we sat down with Keith for an exclusive interview about the book, its inspiration, and the process of writing it.
And it is a book about a battle that occurred in Vietnam in 1970, where a small band of cavalry troopers with tanks, if you can imagine this, in the middle of the jungle, were put into a situation where they had to make a split-second decision about what to do, and they decided among themselves, without any major influence or actually any orders from on high, to try to rescue another band of infantrymen who had inadvertently walked into a major North Vietnamese supply depot and bunker complex and found themselves surrounded by 4, 5, 6, 7 to 1. No one really knew. And they were doomed to be all killed or captured by the end of the day unless somebody did something. And these guys decided to do the right thing and go off and try to pull off this rescue, which they did. And that story is amazing enough in and of itself, but the after story is that the Army lost all the records of this battle, and some of the recommendations for awards and so forth that had been generated because of the bravery of some of these men. And that wasn't discovered until almost 35 years later, when the commander of these troops, who at the time was a young Army captain, discovered quite by accident that his men had never gotten the awards that he had put them in for. So he said, that's wrong, I got to fix this. And he fought another 6-year battle to finally get them all recognized, which ultimately ended up in the entire group going to the White House, the Rose Garden, and being awarded the Presidential Unit Citation by President Obama. It's quite a story. I saw the article talking about these men and what they had done, and the fact that they were going to the White House to receive this prestigious award. I saw that article in the New York Times. I said, this is a story I have to write. I tracked down the guy who was the principal character in the story, who's now a very successful businessman in Houston, Texas. And I said, boy, you've got a heck of a story. I would like to write it. And he said, well, get in line, pal, because I've because of the article and some other things, I got about 20 to 25 other authors who've already said, I want to write your book. And I said, well, okay. I mean, all I can do is put together a proposal, which we did. And I think ultimately our proposal was the best. But I also honestly think I got a little bit of an edge in doing this story because I was the only one of the group of authors that had put forth the idea who was also a Vietnam vet. And I don't mind trading in a little bit of influence to get to write this book. It took me, 8 months of daily writing to go from the proposal to the final draft manuscript. But I think that a book of this type, and you shoot for something like 80 to 100,000 words in a book like this, that's pretty standard. I think anybody who sticks with it, which you got to do, it takes about a year to create a product like that, especially nonfiction, when you've got to check a lot of facts and do a lot of research. So that timing was pretty comfortable. There were probably slightly more than 300, maybe 325 men who were somewhat involved in this battle and rescue. It came down to about 125 guys that were willing to really spend some time talking about their experiences. Some of the men I contacted were not willing to talk about their experiences. They buried it long ago when they took off their uniforms and got back from Vietnam, and they didn't want anything to do with bringing this back to the surface. I think about 90 of these 125 ended up with some presence in the book, Blackhorse Riders, and they are a wonderfully diverse group. Bottom line is that they were then, and they pretty much are now, regular guys, ordinary Joes. They weren't Delta Force, they weren't Green Berets, they weren't Navy SEALs, they were a number of them draftees, some of them enlistees, but only to avoid the draft, a few regular Army soldiers. But, these were pretty typical grunts, guys, GIs, if you will. And what really impressed me at the very beginning of putting together their story is that they pretty much decided when the chips were down that they had to do the right thing. I mean, they could have easily ignored the cries for help from their fellow soldiers. They had no orders to do what they did. Nobody would have criticized them if they had just sat still and waited for orders or for something else to happen. But they pretty much as a group, and almost universally without complaint or objection, which is pretty unusual among a group of guys like this, said, we got to do this. Let's saddle up and go try to rescue these guys. And they did. When I first put the proposal together, and my agent was successful in selling it to St. Martin's, we thought it was going to look like a fairly scholarly, obviously nonfiction story about these events. But the editor said, no, I don't want that. And I want to see footnotes. I want to put it all in the back in a bibliography or something. I want this to be a nonfiction book, but I want it to read like fiction. And the story is good enough that certainly it does. So I was able to take dozens and dozens and dozens of statements from these guys, and I wove them into a narration, which I think fits together in a logical timeline, but it really is their story. It's not mine. It's their story, their words. I'm just the narrator. I just put it all together. It reads like fiction. In fact, some of the things these guys did are like, wow. It's hard to believe, but they did. It's all true. What I hope comes across in the book, other than the actual stories of what happened over this very condensed period of time, is that people come away with feel-good story about Vietnam. We don't have too many feel-good stories about Vietnam. And it's time to reach some closure for our Vietnam vets. Well, yes, like myself, but mostly for guys like this who were typically unsung heroes. One fellow who has a prominent position in the book started out in East LA, in the ghetto, and didn't really know what he was going to do with his life, and then decided to go to community college, came from a relatively poor family, and during his first year of college knew that he was going to get drafted, so he ran down to the recruiter and signed up. He became a sergeant tank commander, and he was very instrumental in the good things that happened during this story. And he won a Silver Star for his efforts, which is pretty impressive. But he also tells a story about coming back from Vietnam, and when he got off the plane, he went back to LA, and he, like many Vietnam vets, tells about the scorn and the people yelling at the soldiers, saying, "Oh, you're all baby killers," and it was not a pleasant experience. And then, almost 40 years later, he goes with the rest of the guys to the White House to meet the President of the United States and get this very prestigious award. And he has a wonderful way of looking at it. He said, "When we came home from Vietnam, we came home through the back door. And now here we are, almost 4 decades later, walking through the front door of the most famous building in America." He said, "Wow, what a difference." And that's what I really want people to get, from this book.
For more information about the book and to find out about upcoming appearances, you can check out the website philkeiththeauthor.com. In Huntington, Chris Collora reporting.